Many immigrants preparing for their U.S. visa interviews may soon face an unexpected barrier not related to background checks, criminal history, or finances, but something far more personal: their health. New reports suggest that the Trump administration is considering rules that could deny visas based on certain medical conditions, potentially changing how U.S. immigration screens applicants around the world. What's concerning is that these health conditions aren't necessarily rare or severe. Even manageable issues like diabetes, depression, or high blood pressure could be part of the discussion, depending on how broad the new criteria become. For years, immigration medical exams have been a routine step. But under these possible changes, that exam could turn into a gatekeeper, one that decides who's fit enough to enter or stay in the country. That's raising serious questions. Who decides what counts as a disqualifying condition? Could people already living in the U.S. face new hurdles when applying for green cards? And what happens to families who are mid-process when this policy takes effect? Critics say this move could open the door to discrimination, while supporters argue it protects public health and reduces healthcare costs. Either way, the potential impact is massive, especially for applicants from regions where medical histories are harder to verify or access to treatment is limited. We'll go through the full list of conditions being discussed, what these proposed restrictions could mean for future immigrants, and how you can prepare if you're planning to apply soon. Stay tuned, because this could affect thousands of lives and reshape America's immigration system in ways few expected. If you support fair immigration policies and believe health shouldn't define opportunity, tap the like button to help this video reach more people who need to hear this update. Now let's break this down carefully, because this story is deeper than just a policy update. It's about how health, immigration, and politics are starting to overlap in ways that could change the future for thousands of families around the world. For decades, the United States immigration system has relied on medical exams primarily as a safety measure to prevent the spread of contagious diseases and to ensure that newcomers can contribute to society without immediately becoming dependent on public health resources. It's been a system built on a mix of practicality and public safety. But what's happening now goes beyond the ordinary framework. This time, it's about who qualifies as healthy enough to enter America, and that question opens a Pandora's box of ethical and legal concerns. According to insiders and policy analysts, the Trump administration's team has been reviewing health-related visa restrictions that could potentially block applications from people with certain ongoing or chronic conditions. The stated justification centers around the costs of treatment and long-term medical dependency. On paper, that might sound reasonable. After all, every country wants to manage healthcare costs responsibly. But here's where it gets complicated. These conditions don't just represent numbers or data points, they represent real people, real lives, and real stories of hope. Take, for instance, someone from India, Pakistan, or the Philippines who's been waiting for years to reunite with their spouse or children in the U.S. They've passed every background check, every financial test, and every interview. But now, a medical note about controlled diabetes or mild anxiety could suddenly raise a red flag. A visa officer might pause and think, does this condition fit under the new health risk criteria? If the rule passes, that single moment could mean the difference between a family reunion and another year or several years of painful separation. And it's not only new applicants who could be affected. Immigration lawyers are warning that these proposed changes could ripple across categories, including people applying for green cards, student visas, and even employment-based visas. The reasoning behind that concern is simple. Once a regulation like this is introduced in one category, it often extends into others over time. That's how most immigration rules evolve: quietly, gradually, and often without clear communication until it's too late. One of the biggest worries is that mental health conditions might also be included. If so, this could discourage countless individuals from seeking treatment out of fear that their medical records could one day be used against them in an immigration process. We've already seen this pattern in other policy areas where people avoid getting help because they're afraid of being flagged. And that fear can have devastating long-term consequences, not just for individuals, but for communities at large. Experts point out that U.S. immigration law already includes public health safeguards through the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's (CDC) medical exam requirements. Applicants are screened for diseases like tuberculosis and syphilis, and they're checked for vaccination compliance. Those measures make sense and have been in place for decades. But what's being discussed now seems to expand the definition of inadmissibility based on health. In other words, it's not about preventing disease outbreaks, it's about excluding people deemed too costly or too dependent. And that distinction is what's raising alarms among human rights advocates. Let's be honest here, no one chooses to have a health condition. Whether it's high blood pressure, depression, asthma, or even recovering from surgery, these are human experiences that cross borders and nationalities. Yet under this potential rule, health could turn into a label that determines who deserves opportunity and who doesn't. That's not just a policy issue, it's a moral one. Now, the Trump administration's supporters argue that such a move is about protecting taxpayers and ensuring that only self-sufficient immigrants are allowed entry. They frame it as a fairness issue. Why should American citizens shoulder medical expenses for newcomers? But the counter-argument, supported by numerous studies, shows that immigrants overall contribute more in taxes than they consume in benefits. In fact, many immigrants are part of the essential workforce: doctors, nurses, caregivers, construction workers, drivers who literally keep the system running. So the idea that they're an economic burden doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Still, the political optics are powerful. In a time when public attention is divided and fear sells headlines, the idea of health-based immigration control plays well to certain voter bases. It taps into emotions rather than facts, suggesting that the government is protecting its own citizens from risk even if that risk is exaggerated. But when you strip away the rhetoric, you find policies that are less about safety and more about exclusion. Behind the scenes, there's growing concern among U.S. consular officers, too. Many of them are the ones who will have to interpret these health-based guidelines if they're implemented. Without clear definitions, officers could be forced to make judgment calls based on incomplete information or subjective impressions. That opens the door to inconsistency, bias, and even discrimination. One officer might consider mild depression manageable, another might not. One doctor might flag obesity as a potential long-term risk, while another might not mention it at all. And when decisions like these decide people's futures, such inconsistencies become serious. There's also the question of transparency. Will the government release an official list of disqualifying conditions? Or will it remain vague, leaving applicants guessing? Historically, when policies like this are introduced, they start vague and then evolve through practice and court challenges. That means applicants could find themselves navigating a moving target, never fully sure what's allowed and what's not. The ripple effects could reach families already living legally in the U.S. as well. Suppose someone on a temporary visa develops a health issue, maybe a student is diagnosed with cancer during their degree, or a worker develops a heart condition while employed under an H-1B visa. Will renewal applications be affected? Will those individuals be labeled as a public charge? These are not hypothetical fears, these are real situations that could unfold under such policies. When you listen to stories from immigration lawyers across the country, you can sense the anxiety building. One attorney in Los Angeles recently shared that several clients have already started to delay their visa medical appointments because they don't know what questions will suddenly become deal breakers. Another advocate in New York said that doctors conducting immigration exams are receiving fewer applicants not because of health issues, but because of fear of being misjudged. That fear spreads fast in immigrant communities. News travels quickly through WhatsApp groups, community centers, and family calls abroad. When one person gets denied, others hesitate. It becomes a chain reaction of doubt, hesitation, and panic, and once that spreads, trust in the system starts to erode. What's even more interesting is how this ties into the broader pattern of immigration restrictions during the Trump era. Over the years, we've seen bans based on nationality, increased scrutiny for public charge determinations, and limits on asylum claims. Adding a health-based exclusion fits perfectly into that larger narrative of tightening eligibility through multiple layers, one policy at a time. Supporters might call it common sense. Opponents call it a quiet form of discrimination wrapped in bureaucratic language. But regardless of what you call it, the impact is undeniable: fewer people qualifying, longer waiting times, and more uncertainty for families who've already invested their life savings in this process. To understand how real this could get, let's look at past precedents. In the early 20th century, health exclusions were far more common. Immigrants arriving at Ellis Island were turned away for conditions as mild as poor vision or pregnancy. Over time, society evolved and realized that such practices were unjust. Medical science advanced, human rights awareness grew, and immigration policies became more humane. Rolling back to a system that once judged people based on medical conditions would feel like turning back the clock by nearly a century. Healthcare professionals are also voicing concerns. The American Medical Association has stated that linking immigration status to health risks stigmatizes both patients and practitioners. It discourages preventive care and drives people underground, where they're less likely to get treated. And in public health terms, that's the worst outcome possible because when people hide illnesses out of fear, everyone becomes less safe. From a humanitarian perspective, this potential rule clashes with America's long-standing image as a land of opportunity. For generations, people came here seeking a better life, often fleeing poverty, conflict, or inadequate health care. To now turn them away for the very reason they're seeking safety, their health, is deeply ironic. It's like saying, "We'll help you only if you don't need help." That's not the vision of America that many immigrants grew up believing in. And that's why this issue is striking such a nerve. It's not just a bureaucratic update, it's an emotional one. It cuts to the core of what fairness means in the immigration system. In the weeks ahead, analysts expect more details to emerge about which conditions could be listed. Some sources suggest it might start with communicable diseases and expand gradually into chronic or mental health conditions. Others say it may target conditions that require costly ongoing treatments. Either way, the line between public health and discrimination is blurring fast, and the consequences could be far-reaching. You also have to consider how this might affect relationships between the U.S. and other countries. Diplomatic partners could push back, arguing that the policy unfairly stigmatizes citizens of nations with higher rates of certain illnesses. International organizations might step in, citing violations of human rights treaties. We've seen similar pushback before when health-based entry restrictions were introduced for HIV patients decades ago, restrictions that were eventually lifted because they proved both ineffective and inhumane. Now, some might argue that this is just speculation, that the administration hasn't officially implemented the rule yet. That's technically true, but the process of drafting and testing such policies often happens behind closed doors long before they're announced. And once drafts are leaked or discussed in policy circles, they often indicate the direction things are heading. That's why staying informed now is so important. If this does move forward, advocacy groups are expected to challenge it legally. Civil rights lawyers are preparing to argue that it violates both the Equal Protection Clause and existing international health standards. They'll likely point out that health conditions are not a valid basis for predicting whether someone will become a financial burden, especially in a system where private insurance and sponsorship already exist. But legal challenges take time, and during that time, lives hang in limbo. Applications freeze, families wait, and hope starts to fade. And for immigrants, waiting is one of the hardest parts. You live in uncertainty, planning every move around an outcome that might never come. So if you're someone preparing to apply for a visa or green card, what can you do? First, don't panic. Stay informed from credible sources, not rumors. Second, be honest in your medical exams. Lying or hiding information can lead to far worse consequences. And third, pay attention to official updates from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and the Department of State. Policies change fast, and knowing the facts before rumors spread is key to staying ahead. For now, this proposed rule hasn't become law, but it's a reminder of how fragile immigration policy can be. It shifts with administrations, agendas, and even headlines. What seems stable today can become uncertain tomorrow. And for immigrants around the world, that constant unpredictability is the hardest part of the journey. This isn't just about health or paperwork, it's about people's lives being reduced to medical conditions. It's about families separated over a diagnosis, and dreams paused over a lab result. The immigration process was never easy, but now, it's turning personal in ways that test the very idea of fairness and compassion. So as this story develops, one thing is clear: policies like this force us to ask bigger questions. What kind of society do we want to be? One that values people for their potential, or one that judges them for their conditions? Because at the end of the day, health isn't a measure of worth, it's a shared human experience. And if opportunity is only for the perfectly healthy, then it's not really opportunity at all. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying informed. These topics matter more than most people realize, and your awareness makes a difference. Before you go, hit the like button to help this video reach more people who need to know what's coming, and don't forget to subscribe for future updates on US immigration changes, policies, and news that could affect millions around the world.